Hello and welcome to Tuning In 2020. We at Radiocentre would have loved to welcome you all to the Leicester Square IMAX Theatre, but sadly that's not been possible today. However, we're great optimists at Radiocentre and we're all about Bounceback today, and we're viewing it very much as an opportunity to talk to even more of you via this live streaming event, the first ever virtual Tuning In. So as I say, today we're going to be very much focused on the future. We're such a strong, resourceful industry, the world of advertising, media, radio and audio. Now, advertising is often seen as the engine of the economy, and rightly so, and radio as the bellwether medium within that. So if we bounce back strongly, I think that's a really good signal for the rest of the industry and beyond indeed. So looking at the current stages of the crisis we're in, I think it's possible to look at them in three separate sections. So first of all, there's the shock. I think we all experienced the shock of a sudden lockdown of so much of our economy in the end of March. Next comes the bounce back, and I think we're about to enter that phase now with lockdown gradually ending. And the final phase, which of course is longer, is recession/recovery. So those are the three sections that we're going to be focusing on very much today in Tuning In 2020. Now, the last couple of months have seen an amazing amount of activity across the whole of the radio industry, as indeed in many other industries. We've sprung into action. I think stations up and down the country have been making absolutely heroic efforts to stay on air, to keep their listeners informed with vital public service information, to keep them company during these difficult times when we're very much confined to our homes. And finally, just to provide a much needed laugh in difficult times. And I think the radio industry has done that incredibly well. Listening figures, of course, have been incredibly buoyant during this time. Both Global and Bauer have registered a 15% uplift in digital daily reach. And last week's Radar figures, which obviously were mainly done pre-lockdown, but showed that 9 out of 10 of us are still tuning into the radio every week. Some recent research conducted for Radiocentre by DRG showed that 38% of people, of commercial radio listeners, are listening for an hour and 45 minutes extra each day. So that's a significant uplift. And this chart shows what is responsible for that uplift. Of course, it's people who are at home much more than they normally would be. So workers and non-workers locked down at home, but also, interestingly, key workers looking for vital information about, what's open, what's not, as they in fact are carrying on going to work. So those are the principal reasons for that, which are pretty obvious when you think about it. But perversely, as we enjoy a surge in listenership, advertising revenues have been hit incredibly hard. And that's sort of obvious when you think about it, as advertisers are reining in spending as a result of the lockdown. This walk data shows intentions pre and post lockdown. And I think you'll agree that's a pretty sobering chart. So I'd like to turn now to some of Radiocentre's activity in response to the pandemic. We've introduced an online coronavirus hub, which gathers together lots of interesting and useful data, particularly facing advertisers, but also the whole of the industry. The Remedy Rescue is something I would definitely recommend, just as some interesting tips about how to use radio during a downturn and just what a versatile medium it really is. We've also introduced these 60-second support slots in conjunction with, funded by the Audio Content Fund, but in conjunction with a range of mental health charities. And these are 1-minute segments which are being broadcast across the community and commercial networks right now just addressing that critical issue of mental health during this difficult time. All of which serves to remind us of several key attributes of radio. At the moment, audiences are far more available. Radio is often seen as a friend in the room, so it's a great environment to be in. That as people listen to the radio, they're often going about other tasks, so it's a great place for relevance targeting, as our study Here and Now showed last year. But I suppose first and foremost for me, radio is a trusted medium. This EU study out just recently shows that for the 10th consecutive year, radio continues to be the most trusted medium. And I think that is an attribute that simply can't be overemphasized at this point, where trusted, well-sourced and checked information is just critical for us to get through this phase and move on to the next one. During this time, of course, we at Radiocentre have been very busy behind the scenes, working with government and regulators to ensure that we come out of this crisis with a thriving, healthy commercial radio industry. It's a great industry that provides a plethora of voices and news for all our richly diverse audiences in the UK. That's something that's very, very important to us, and we know it is to the government as well. So next up will come the Bounceback phase. We may even be entering that phase now. Let's look and see if there's any evidence of consumer behaviour that can help us predict what might happen next. Well, for which, of course, we turn to the Asian markets. Sadly, in that part of the world, they have experienced 3 major disasters in the last sort of 20 years. So there's the SARS outbreak, the Fukushima disaster, and then the MERS outbreak. And I think these patterns are really quite interesting to observe. That first of all, there's a very sharp dip, followed by quite a big bounce back, and then a levelling out after time. So that's sort of something for us to bear in mind, and I think it's probably quite an encouraging sign. So what advice do we have about the quickest way to return to growth? Well, all previous studies shows that those who maintain advertising spend during a recession are the quickest to return to growth, to increase their market share, and to boost profitability. Sadly, we also know that during a recession, advertising budgets can be the very first to be hit. Now, these recent studies from the London Business School, advertising in a recession, shows what happens. So back to today, we've got a great lineup for you, and we're going to keep it moving along at a fast pace. But there's just a couple of final things that I want to mention. First of all, the Mental Health Minute, which returned for the 3rd consecutive year yesterday and played out across over 500 stations, community, BBC, and the commercial network. I can't think of a more salient time for us to be thinking about our mental health. It was simply the best, and I want to thank everyone who took part, and particularly Something Else, who really made a massive difference to how that played out this year. And of course, there's the Young Audio Awards. If you want to know where tomorrow's talent is coming from, I think this is a pretty good place to start. This was a virtual event that was streamed a couple of weeks ago, and the sheer joy of it just jumps out of the screen. So sit back now, we're ready to enjoy the show. Obviously today, just to remind you, is about shock, bounce back and recovery, principally the latter. And we hope to be sharing with you lots of informative tips and have some fun as well along the way. Thank you for tuning in.